Nike, Adidas, weißt du, so, das waren schon Schuhe, die du auf jeden Fall. Ja, was heißt es hat auch eigentlich keinen gejuckt, so, weißt du, aber so in einem Nebensatz hat man mal gesagt, boah, der, guck dich meine neuen Adidas-Schuhe an, Alter, die sind richtig heftig. Vor allem Puma gab's noch. Gibt's Puma noch? Ja, okay, Puma gibt's noch, aber so, das irgendwie trägt auch keiner mehr, ne? Das war so das Einzige. Aber sonst tatsächlich, es hat sich wirklich niemand für Markenklamotten und so weiter interessiert, ne? Ja, heutzutage ist es natürlich anders, ne? Mit den ganzen Influencern und so. Heutzutage auch mit Instagram, jeder will sich selbst darstellen, jeder will zeigen, wie krass er ist, so, ne? Und da haben solche Sachen natürlich eine höhere Gewichtung. Also ganz ehrlich, also Real Talk, ich weiß jetzt nicht, wann ich welche Marke zum ersten Mal gehört habe, aber bis vor ein paar Jahren, vielleicht 2018, 2017, so geschätzt, keine Ahnung, oder 16, ich kannte so Läden wie Gucci und ja, Louis hat man schon mal gehört, so, ne? Aber das war auch gar nicht so im Kopf, sag ich mal, so, wisst ihr, was ich meine? So, das war gar nicht so, dass man jetzt so Gucci, Burberry und so, das waren für mich alles gar keine Namen. Das kannte ich damals einfach gar nicht so, ne? Und heutzutage läuft ja jeder Zwölfjährige gefühlt damit rum.
Rückschrittig. Und sie sagt ja auch selber, dass
ja, damals war so, ja, Etat, die Sachen zum Beispiel hat man irgendwie getragen, sonst noch ich nicht,
Feind
aber
von Freizügigkeit ist. Und für die Selbstbestimmung der Frau. Aber dann verstehe ich trotzdem nicht dieses ganze Video. Dementsprechend glaube ich, dass das ein großer Versuch war, ein Placement bringen zu können mit einer Videolänge von um und bei 20 Minuten. Aber sagt mir doch gerne
ach, Digga, das ist halt, also da wird sehr viel komisches Zeug reininterpretiert auf jeden Fall. So das ist doch den Leuten, also das ist doch dem Placement-Macher ist es doch egal, ob das Video 10 oder 20 Minuten geht. Das Wichtige ist, dass das Placement innerhalb der ersten 90 Sekunden gezeigt wird.
Eure Meinung? Ich bin mittlerweile schon so weit, ich kann einfach nicht mehr. Ich wollte dieses Video auf jeden Fall gemacht haben. Folgt mir gerne auf Instagram, dort könnt ihr mir auch gerne Themen zukommen lassen. Ich suche zurzeit die schlechtesten Influencer
Zusammenfassung, er versteht das Video
auf
nicht.
YouTube Deutschland, aber auch der Welt.
Hör auf, hör auf, Digga, ja, hör auf, wehe. Ich block dich, ich bann dich, Digga, ich strike dich.
Genug Wasser.
Ja, ansonsten, ja, was soll ich euch sagen? Also mit 1, 2 Punkten hat er, finde ich, recht. Ich finde aber, ja, er soll mal ein bisschen chillen. Also für mich kam das eher so rüber, wie man möchte Alicia Joy jetzt einfach irgendwie halt kritisieren. Also, ne, wie gesagt, in ein paar Punkten stimme ich ihm auf jeden Fall zu. Aber ich finde, der hat das schon zu negativ gesehen, auf jeden Fall. Ne? Aber ich stimme ihm in einigen Sachen auf jeden Fall trotzdem zu. Ne? Aber trotzdem irgendwie, weiß ich nicht, ist so, ja, zu hart irgendwie. So, ich muss schon wieder auf Toilette, ne? Es ist krass. Das hier, hilf mal hier, ich nehme mein Handy mit.
Light bless you.
Gerade gesagt, dass ich noch eine Talkrunde mache und dann gleich gehe. Also, nein, offensichtlich keine. Nicht das Video von Mazdak. Was ist deine Meinung zum Gendern? Ja, habe ich dagegen. Ich finde es einfach nur super nervig.
In a bubble. And it's like, yeah, okay.
Hello.
Yep. Your mic's
Hey.
quiet.
Oh, my mic's quiet.
Actually, that's okay. It's better.
What can I do for
Are
you?
you sure? Is everything fine?
friend.
I'll turn.
Be careful.
Right, that's
Whoops. Hold
great.
on.
Well,
How did he get in here? It's gonna be a vegan debate. Oh
uh,
god.
yeah, thanks for the invite, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think Steven's screaming and yelling at his audience right now.
Sorry, hold on. Some guy
Oh.
about digging trenches.
They take their trenches very seriously in that community.
There's a lot of trench digging extravagance going on at the minute, isn't there, with Wagner and Ukraine and all that anyway, so.
True.
So yeah, well, thank you for the conversation. Really quite unexpected. I'm happy to have the opportunity.
So,
How have you been?
originally, real quick, the plan was that we were just gonna have a panel where we were gonna talk about, like, every Tuesday we go over like everything that's happened over the last week. A bunch of different content creators jump on. A bunch of people wanted to talk about the whatever podcast debate that Destiny had. So that was scheduled for 9 o'clock tonight. I invited Destiny to come on and have the conversation as well, but he wasn't able to make it. Wanted to make it earlier, and so this is who all could make it earlier today. It turns out to be a little bit odd when I guess I'm pro-life. He's a freaking vegan. Destiny's very pro-choice and uh, bases that off of consciousness. So I figured we could at least like start talking about the consciousness part first, and then um, maybe just see where it goes from there. Because I feel like you two are pro-choice, so I feel like I'm gonna be the odd man out here. So I
Oh,
might
I'm
just
not. I'm not pro-choice. I'm not.
Oh, you're not
pro-choice.
pro-choice.
Oh no,
Oh.
no, no, no. No. If anything, I'm closer to pro-life. But like, I'm a sentientist, so I'm somewhere in between, really. So, yeah, I think we're actually kind of a good mix because we probably represent the entire spectrum in a way, which is characteristic of various viewpoints. So, I mean, obviously you've got your sort of you two on the far extremes, and then I would call for a severely lessened, like a lower barrier to abortion, or rather lower cutoff for abortion. Maybe even as low as 8 weeks, depending on where research goes. But 13 weeks, 11 to 13 weeks.
11 to 13 weeks, damn. Okay, yeah, I'm like end of first trimester. Like I base it off of being human and being alive. Having a heartbeat and brain function is when we consider you dead. Or if you don't have a heartbeat and brain function, we consider you dead. So I think once you have a heartbeat and brain function, we consider you alive. So as long as you're human and alive, I think that we give you that value. So mine's like, yeah, first trimester, end of first trimester. And then Destiny, what was yours again?
Mine is as soon as I think you have a conscious experience.
And that happens between 18 to 22 weeks?
Between 20 to 28 weeks, so I just say stop at 20 weeks.
Because I think like the main difference is how we're even approaching what consciousness is, and I think that's probably the best way to like to see how this is like how we're categorizing it. I think Destiny, if I'm correct, like I don't. Do you want? Is it better I call you Stephen or Destiny? By the way, I still don't know whether to.
Either one is fine. Okay, Stephen's fine.
Either one's fine. Okay. So I think Stephen wants to say that it is cortex development, that the sort of right parts of the brain start communicating, and now we have the first emergence of human consciousness. Would you? The question is, would you say that it was conscious before that and it wasn't a human like level of consciousness, or is it like, because I think you want to say that it just wasn't conscious and then it becomes conscious, right?
Yeah, it wasn't conscious and then it becomes conscious.
Right. And like to clarify, I think that that's not exactly the best way of approaching it. I think from what we've seen in terms of the evidence that we have, the only reason that we would really attribute cortex development to consciousness is based off a few different sort of presuppositions in the field that have since been questioned quite radically. One such basically presupposition is that higher functions are necessary for conscious experience, where there seems to be neurological experiments, sort of freak cases that show the alternative, where people have lost large parts of their brain but appear conscious, or they've had their brain severed, in the sense like in the split brain experiments, and there seems to arise two distinct conscious experiences, or possibly two distinct conscious experiences. There's also how we collect and understand brain development in the first place. So the reason that we would even attribute sort of consciousness to the human brain is really based off people saying like, all right, you're conscious, right? Like I'm conscious, and then me attributing consciousness to another, and then going, okay, well, if we just assume that they're conscious and scan their brain, we can now basically affirm that this is the structure necessary for consciousness. And so the reason that we'll kind of say cortex development is because it has the closest sort of, in terms of development, it's what we would consider a sort of fully operational brain that we're attributing consciousness to. But that's really just based off sort of reports, which are already based off behavioral analysis. So we've already kind of attributed consciousness to the subject before we then ad hoc it to the brain state, or rather the brain structure in the first place. So I'm just wondering why you say 24 weeks, given that sort of issue, like in terms of actually collecting when a being is conscious.
I have never heard in my entire life another proposal for where consciousness comes from other than the brain. The prefrontal cortex, I guess, of the brain.
I mean, no one's even. I'm assuming, like, Tom, do you actually have an issue with consciousness coming from the brain? Or?
No.
So let's all assume, we all agree that consciousness emanates from a fully functioning brain, whether it's like whether you're someone as far as Castro, where it's, you know, it's a sort of what's he called it, like a basically detector for consciousness, or basically a way that consciousness sort of attunes itself and manifests through this metabolized structure, or it's just a straight up physicalist where it's an emergent property, and let's say it's even epiphenomenal, right? It's not even causal. Like, either way, you're probably going to affirm it's connected to a brain somehow. The real question is, why are we affirming it's connected to the brain at specifically the point of 20 weeks in cortex development, when behavioral analysis was a prerequisite to the attribution in the first place? So if I've already affirmed that someone is conscious, and then said, well, this is what a conscious brain looks like, why can't I just go back to the behavioral analysis rather than strictly base it off this?
Because we could probably imagine a bunch of behavior that would probably be insufficient to establish a conscious experience.
Like what?
Like, I could create a robot with some rudimentary functions that could mimic certain types of behavior, but I don't know if we would say that that particular thing is conscious.
Why would we say that it's not conscious, though?
Because the faculty needed to process all of the higher order things, all of the abstract emergent things that are happening in a conscious experience aren't there. It's just a couple of rudimentary processes that are moving a thing from point A to point B. Unless for you that's enough to say it's a conscious thing because it can move something.
Well, no, I just think it's enough to say that we could start saying that, like, the more complex something like that becomes, like a predictive engine, it could become something capable of passing a Turing test.
Do you think that all consciousness
hold on,
is the same?
Or I don't think a Turing test has anything to do with consciousness. And then just because something is complicated, I don't know if you would say it's conscious. Like, we can probably think of a lot of complicated things that aren't conscious. Like a rock rolling down a hill can take a million different potential paths, or like we can think of a lot of things that are complicated or chaotic that aren't conscious, I would imagine, no?
Yeah, I would agree, but I think that we would see that the difference is whether they are emanating not just base reactions, like the way that a plant or a microorganism would, where it's a set response to stimuli, or whether it's
what is the difference
behavior.
between a set response to stimuli, a behavior, or reaction? Aren't these all?
So I would say that the difference between like a behavior and a mere reaction seems to be the capacity to relate to one's external environment, make a problem solve, make a decision, sort of either, I would say, discriminate in relation to one's environment, recognize one's environment, and then make a response in relation to an end goal based off that, what could be a change in the environment. So you would see, like,
yeah, I understand. I don't need an
know.
example. I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying, but couldn't all of these things just be complicated chains of reactions, big if-then chain statements?
Yeah, I mean, but that's what a Pavlovian or a Skinner would say was a human, right? That it was a complex behavioral machine, and that consciousness was epiphenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, I mean, are you a hard determinist?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed you brought this up last time in the vegan gains debate, in terms of, you said like a dog could just be having a Pavlovian response versus a human having like the semantic understanding, meaning the qualitative response. But if you're a hard determinist, one, I don't know why that would matter, and two, it seems that it seems to be beyond the point. It doesn't, like, the whole point for the Pavlovian isn't to say that these beings aren't conscious. It's just to say that consciousness as a emergent property would be just essentially a complicated if-then, a sort of pattern recognition system, responding to value structures that were given to it by nature.
It seems difficult to build consciousness out of if-then statements, the experience of consciousness out of just if-then statements. Like, how is my experience right now, my meta-reflection of myself, how is that just if-then statements? That seems hard to...
Well, I would agree. I mean, I'm not the... I would say, I'm not a Pavlovian or like a Skinner in the first place, but I think that what they're essentially arguing is that through the relation of external stimuli, so if it's like so for example, like what about would your experience would you say would be too complex for a sophisticated predictive engine, let's say something far exceeding ChatGPT, right? Let's say like an order of 100 of something like ChatGPT, couldn't essentially project an environment and then react to it based off reserving memory and like a memory reserve, a memory bank of like previous responses, and then building up the complexity of those responses into a lived experience, which I mean, surely you could imagine that you would have everything from a psychological continuity, that you could have a relationship to environment, that you would learn from that relationship to the environment, that your predictions may
I understand what you're
manifest
saying, but everything you're
yeah.
doing is a behavioral analysis. I don't think that, like I said, we can create a sufficiently complicated script on a computer to have behavior, but I don't think people would ever feel like a conscious experience arises from the behavior.
I mean, I would agree. I would agree that we would say that we would want to say that language and even behavior itself indicates something other than itself, that is sort of a deeper level, which I think you would call a qualia. I just want to know why you would say that a being which is like I'd rather that why we would even say that all of that wouldn't why the qualia wouldn't come from that anyway. Like it's like for you it seems like this is a very physicalist approach. This is like a very behavioralist form of analysis in which there's no like sort of spirit or sort of anything other than just...
To simplify this down, I don't understand. It sounds like you're saying that, like, why can't a bunch of behaviors just be called consciousness? That sounds like the simplified version of what you're saying, right?
No, I'm just saying, like, why can't consciousness emerge from behaviors? Like, since we seem to basically rely upon behavior.
That doesn't seem to be possible. I can't imagine that without some immaterial thing. Again, I can create rudimentary behaviors with a script that's 30 lines long, but it seems hard to imagine that there's a conscious experience happening there.
But I don't know what I just think it's sort of like ruling it out in the sense of like we're just saying it's not an intuitive, based on the fact that we are having an experience. But if that experience is essentially just like a behavioral, like I'm not an epiphenomenalist. I just want to point out that even if we did say that dogs are pure Pavlovian, that like we go the absolute like hard materialist Pavlovian way of going about things, I'm just wondering why this is like a dog is just this scripted engine with consciousness, because you said they were conscious, I think. But you just said they didn't have our kind of consciousness, and then you have our kind of consciousness, and I'm just trying to work out what that difference is, how it relates to the structure of the brain, and also cannot be detected through a form of behavioral analysis. Because really, that's what we'll have to say. Because otherwise,
wait, what do we
could
have to say
attribute
this for? Yeah, what are you attributing it for?
Yeah, because otherwise, at 20 weeks, we could say that before 20 weeks, there is significant behaviors that we could start to attribute consciousness to either a non-human or a human level, in your sort of vernacular, and if it's not the behaviors, then the question is, why are we even attributing it to these structures in the first place, since our recognition of behaviors is how we recognize consciousness in fully formed adults.
I don't think we're recognizing behaviors. I think we're also recognizing like the brain structure like functioning, right? Like for instance, the behavior of a sleeping person on its face might look similar to the behavior of a dead person. Let's assume we can make the dead person breathe, but we can like hook machines up to a brain and look at like electrical signals and say, oh, it looks like there's activity here, so it's different.
Yeah, I would agree, but I mean, like, why do we attribute, like, for example, the whole point is like, why do we attribute those electrical signals in the brain with consciousness or specific experiences, and it's because we'll take someone when they're sleeping, and we'll go, right, they're asleep, they're not dead, they might be dreaming or whatever. In the same way when we look at an animal when it's moving and it's sleeping, and we'll go, oh, it's dreaming, and then we'll put them in an MRI scanner, and we'll map out the through magnetic resonance the electrical signals in the brain, and we'll be like, this is the conscious experience of someone they're sleeping. This is how the brain works when someone's sleeping, and there is like dreaming happening here. So it's the same way that we would go, this is a fully conscious individual having an experience of X. Let's scan their brain. Now we have an indication of what's going on in the brain when they're having the experience of X. Like, what we're doing prior to scanning their brain is relying upon their reports, and it's kind of an impossible task to get out of, because otherwise, like, look at it like this: we could just assume everyone was a P zombie. Everyone but yourself is a P zombie, a predictive engine which has evolved complex social behaviors in order to survive. They're willing to tell you they're conscious. You scan their brain, you gain the exact same information. Like, you just have to trust the report. It's because it's basically the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay, I don't. What is the alternative, or what is the point of this line of inquiry? I guess I've never thought to think of like maybe consciousness just arises from simple behaviors or whatever. I don't know what the value is, or I don't even know what the point is of this line of inquiry. Like, what are we trying to establish, or what are we going down?
The point is why we would basically say, in one case, behavioral analysis in relation to two humans going into a neurological experiment is sufficient to say that consciousness exists prior to the experiment beginning, and as a precedent for the experiment to have any clinical, or rather any sort of scientific validity. So like basically you are conscious, let's make an experiment to look at consciousness. And we do that through behavioral analysis. But when it comes to knowing whether a fetus is conscious, we have to rely upon a fully functioning or a fully integrated brain. I just don't see why we would use one standard for entering into the form of analysis and then use another standard for the, like a fetus, for example.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't understand the line of inquiry. It feels like we're on one end, you're hitting at the idea that like, it feels like you're asking me this question. If I see a person in public and they talk like a man, they look like a man, they act like a man, and then you say, isn't it strange that you determine that that person's a man, but at birth you have to see their dick? Isn't that hypocritical? That sounds like what you're saying. Like, for a normal person, I'm assuming they're conscious based on a set of behaviors, but I'm assuming that those behaviors are proxying something happening in the brain. If I were to later find out that the underlying brain things didn't exist, I might feel differently about the behaviors, like they're a doppelganger or a robot or something. But just because I'm able to ascertain whether or not I think somebody's having a conscious experience because I'm using behaviors as a proxy for brain activity, I don't think that that necessarily means that all of consciousness is ad hoc to brain activity, and now when I'm analyzing brain activity in the womb, it's somehow some arbitrary thing and I should be still looking at behaviors. I just don't understand the line of inquiry.
I'm not saying that brain activity is entirely arbitrary. What I'm saying is that at the point of like let's say when you're at the street and you look at someone and you ascertain they're conscious, you're like, oh, there's someone walking down the street. You don't think, oh, that's a very complicated like machine that looks like a human. It's a synth or something walking down the street, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't think you have any reason to believe that. That's fair enough. But neither did any of the scientists essentially going into the neurological studies when we were attributing consciousness to brain states in the first place. So when we were reducing, like, essentially consciousness to these specific brain states, the whole point is that they used a form of behavioral analysis, assumed those people were conscious, and created these studies.
Yeah, sure.
So behavioral analysis is
but then
foundation.
afterwards, if we modify the brain, it seems we modify the brain state. We modify the conscious state, right?
Yes, I would agree.
So doesn't that seem that if we were to guess that, like, let's say that we assume that, like, wow, that guy's moving and his veins are throbbing, it must be some organ is pumping blood in his body, maybe it's the heart. We just assume that without testing it, then later on we poke holes in the heart and we find out the blood doesn't pump as fast. Then isn't it fair to say, like, oh, okay, well, that assumption is correct. The blood is probably circulating because of the heart.
Absolutely, absolutely. In the same way, like if you give someone like a psychedelic drug and they were to report that it has affected their consciousness, like work out what like chemical formula it is, and you see how it affects the brain, then you know that it's going to have like a few different. Then you can work out. You can start basically through clinical trials, like working out what would be, like what chemicals might cause a psychedelic effect, like where you can basically say, yeah, actually don't take that acid unless you want to be tripping balls, right? Like, yeah, that's fair enough, and that I would 100% agree with that. But the only reason that we would like the whole point is that when we are basing off this, we would basically say based off people's like essentially behavioral responses in the first place. That's essentially all we have. Like in the sense like even when they report back to us in terms of language that their conscious experience has changed. Like let's say someone was to report back to you. Let's say the word you gave them acid and they report back to you like nothing has happened, absolutely nothing has happened, but that behavior is entirely erratic. You're like, no, something has definitely happened, and they affirm to you nothing has happened. Will you believe them or the behavioral analysis?
If wait, will I believe if what if I measure? Wait, say that one more time.
So you give someone a drug,
Yes.
right? They enter into a state that you believe that's going to be like a hallucinogenic state.
They get high, yeah.
They are, yeah. They take the drug. They say they're absolutely fine. Nothing's changed in their experience. Nothing's happened at all.
Mm-hmm.
But to you, their behaviors look like they're tripping balls. They're basically, or like I don't know, like they've taken another drug and they're gurning their face off. Like, are you going to believe their behaviors or their report?
Believe it for what? Whether or not they are high. The fact of the matter, if they're high.
Whether their conscious experience has changed or not.
I'd probably believe the behavior.
Right. Why?
Because the behavior indicates somebody who's high.
So the behavior indicates something about the conscious experience.
Yes.
But okay, so if we accept that the behavior indicates something about the conscious experience, I'm just wondering why it doesn't in the fetus.
Well, hold on. Indicating an altered state of conscious experience is not indicating whether or not something is conscious at all.
No, but it indicates like a causative effect upon consciousness, where we can say that an external stimuli has had an effect upon a being, and their altered behavior shows that.
Sure, but the causative effect has to do with the drug that is interacting with a part of the brain, right? And I'm looking at a fetus. I would be looking at that exact same part of the brain development. No.
But I just don't understand. Like look at it like this: the whole point of you saying that the part of the brain is the part that has consciousness is because we first had these reports and we've basically indicated, okay,
wait,
people
hold on. When you
who
say
have
reports, we're talking about different things here. Somebody self-reporting whether or not they're high is not relying on a self-report that somebody's conscious, right?
I mean, it's the same thing. It's in terms of behavioral analysis or reporting. It does not matter.
I don't think
really
we require like somebody reporting to themselves saying, yes, I am conscious. I don't think we rely on that, no?
No, in terms of a neurological experiment, we absolutely do. Like, it would be saying, what kind of conscious experience are you having?
Or what kind of
like, how do you
neurological
feel?
experience are you? I'm pretty sure that most of these are going to be measured with just, is it an EEG that you stick the electrodes on the head? I don't think we rely on the person to self-report their...
You can't measure a phenomenal experience with an EEG though, mate. Like, if I was to ask you, like what is the experience of red like? You can't give, and you know, she just shows someone.
Oh, sure, I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm just not sure what kind of neurological experience you're talking about, I guess.
I guess the point I'm saying is that, like, I'm assuming that this whole thing relies upon having a qualitative experience of a certain kind, which seems to be indicated to us through behavioral analysis, which is why we construct certain examinations of the brain in the first place, which is why I attribute certain parts of the brain and certain qualities to parts of the brain in the first place. But then when it gets down to that behavioral analysis, like prior to a certain point of fetal development, you start saying that the behavior is simply reactive or even when it's not a pure reaction in the same way like a knee-jerk reaction, you'd still say that that behavior doesn't indicate
Sure, well, how about, okay, rather than the Socratic Inquisition, why not just tell me what is your, because, I see zero value in any of those inquiries. I'm curious, what is your, like, final post, or what do you want to wind up after this?
Well, I guess I just want to know why, like, well, one, I think there's a point of why you were attributing a difference in consciousness to an animal and a human to the point in which it is like, one is of such a radical different kind, like a radically different
the
kind.
behaviors and the cognitive processes of humans seem to be of another kind, substantially different. The metacognitive process of humans seem to be of a substantially different kind versus like a dog or a cat. Like the ability to reflect on oneself, the ability to employ language that's a proxy for sophisticated concepts in the mind of time and space and everything, like seem to be unique to humans versus animals.
Right, and you're saying that none of that, and specifically none of that is there, like the specific human consciousness is there prior to 20 weeks. Even so, like the difference between animals and humans is analyzed through behavioral proxies, which give an indication of what we would probably call like phenomenal or existential differences between subjects. So like a human is having like an experience of like existential dread, where a dog is sort of maybe feels a bit anxious, and you'd say that they are two different kinds of things.
Sure, yeah.
Right, okay. And the reason that one is valuable and one isn't is why?
Where I have no idea. One is human, one isn't. I don't know where value ultimately comes from. I don't know.
Right. So but I'm just wondering, like, if we're just saying, like, one is human and one isn't, right, why would it matter if, like, let's say the dog did have existential dread. Why would it matter to you?
I don't know, because there's probably going to end up being some metacognitive process that allows us to... I don't know. I have to think about it a lot. I'm not sure. They don't, so I don't think about it.
That's the thing. It's just because it seems like, really, it's kind of like when Trent basically pulled you up and he said, look, I think that the human side of things is basically so you don't have to give consideration of animals. And I think the consciousness side of things is so you don't have to give a consideration of zygotes and fetuses before a certain point of development. And all of this seems to be essentially arbitrary. Because, I mean, like, let's be honest, you are a subjectivist, right? So, and it's coming from, like, your descriptions of your behaviors. So, like, why, rather than look towards all of this sort of externality, why don't you just say, like, inwardly, I just feel different? Because that's what it boils down to, right?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, I think it's kind of where we're all at, but sure.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you're right, and let's say we're all at. Then why in the abortion debate, why do we have to relate it to the point in which there is, like, why couldn't you be saying, yes, it's conscious, but it's not having a certain kind of consciousness? And then why would you not be okay, like, in theory, right? Because let's be honest, right? Like, in theory, I think if I was to show you, conclusively, that humans up to the age of 3 do not have the kind of consciousness you're talking about, which probably isn't true, but let's just say it is.
Mm-hmm.
You would still not give a fuck. You still probably would not be okay with killing a 3-year-old. Like,
I mean, theoretically, probably, right? That's the singer position, right?
yeah, basically, yeah, it's Singer's position.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think he's old one. I don't think he's new one. Like, let's say you probably wouldn't be okay with that, regardless, right? So
Well, I don't know why not. I mean, it's not going to truly prove that babies are just like fucking black boxes of like input, output, stimulus, behavior, or whatever, and they're not having any kind of experience at all. I mean, obviously, from a political or optics point of view, it would look different. But I mean, like, I guess it'd be at that point the same as terminating a fetus, sure.
Right. So you actually do see, right? That's the thing, because it seemed to me like it might just be that you feel differently about these things, not that you actually are considering this kind of conscious, like, is this kind of conscious experience having like an emotional impact on you where you go, hey, wait a minute, that's too much like me, I'm having an empathetic response?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, I would imagine respect for humans or any other life is coming from some sort of empathetic response to protect something that's like me or something that's having an experience like me. Carnivore extends that to humans. Vegan extends that to all sentient things, right?
Yeah, I think I mean, I would say that you could have it off pure reason, right? Like, you can't. Like, I think that there's arguments to be had, but I think for the sake of or rather than getting into the meta ethics of it, because that'll just be an absolute mess. I just really want to know where you're attributing value and what is essentially marking that distinction. Because, like, likewise, if we invert that, then if I could argue, like, for example, that there is no reason to attribute a basic input-output experience to dogs, cats, dolphins, chimpanzees, whatever, and instead we have just as much reason to believe that they have belief states, pattern recognition, or recognition of behaviors. They're capable of discerning aspects of their environment and changing their behaviors in the same way that human infants would. I'm just wondering, would that still carry over? Would you still go, oh, wait a minute, okay, that level of sophisticated consciousness now in an animal would mean that I would be vegan.
Potentially, sure.
Right, okay. So let's just talk about, well, why would you say that the dog, cat, chicken, pig, whatever, specifically, doesn't have this level of consciousness?
They don't exceed, or they don't seem to have any of the proxies that I would use to measure for it. Like, unable to employ language. They don't seem to be self-reflective. Like, there's just no way for me to see that type of conscious experience that they're having.
So you're saying, like, in terms of the consciousness experience they're having, there's no way for you to perceive it, right? How would you perceive the conscious experience of an adult or a human, like an adult human?
Well, I mean, I would assume if we have all the same brain structures, that their experience is probably identical to mine.
Right. I mean, one, why, and then two.
Well, why is because I would imagine the same emergent thing would come from the same underlying structures.
But I mean, like, why would you even like? It's kind of like question begging, right? It's like this kind of brain is what produces consciousness, and only this kind of brain. Like it's like, and then if I ask why, you go because this kind of brain produces consciousness, and you go why because I assume that it does.
Well, I'm a big question beggar.
You can see why I would have. I'm just saying, like, it just seems that like you are doing what Trent said. I think Trent really did get you right, to be honest.
Okay.
It's just
Maybe
that you
he
are
did,
saying
possibly.
that there is.
Yes, true. I agree.
Well, I don't know what to say, man.
I mean, this is literally why I say that we just value humans, because I don't think that we can explain why we value human consciousness or anything else like that, except for that it's just human, and we're social animals, so we value other humans. At least the ones around us. We don't value all humans, but the ones
What
that
do
we
you
do
mean by that,
value, we
Tom?
want everybody else to value them. Huh?
What kind of humans don't you value, Tom?
I don't value any of the ones that I don't know.
Yikes.
But I value my family and my friends, and I want everybody else to value them, and the government to value them and give them rights so that they can continue to exist. I'm a little confused though, perspective philosophy. You're saying that you're not an epiphenomenalist, but it sounds like you're making an epiphenomenal argument where it's like intelligence, consciousness, memory determined by qualia. But if that's not what you believe, what do you believe then?
I'm actually a Catholic.
So you believe in a soul?
I believe in a soul. Yeah, I mean, I'm an Aristotelian, so I'd say that the unifying principle of a human being, or sentient being, a sentient creature, is they're having a psyche. So, like, your psychological experience is part of what it means to essentially have a unified experience of your environment. Like for example, I don't see a reason to distinguish between a human consciousness and an animal consciousness in terms of basic awareness, like qualia, like Destiny said. I don't see a reason why we would do that. We might have different ways of engaging with the environment, like Thomas Nagel's point, like, I don't know what it's like to be a bat. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that the bat doesn't have a conscious experience that's analogous to the conscious experience of a dolphin, a chicken, a pig, a human. It's just a different kind of the same thing, mediated through different sort of senses and different like organs, which essentially give it different information about the same thing. It's aware of information. That's basically what consciousness is.
How do you get around being Catholic and God making animals taste good?
Because he also allows us to be tempted and tells us that we shouldn't be bad boys.
So every single animal in the animal kingdom that God's created eats other animals except for humans?
Yeah, I mean, we're the only ones, like, the whole point of the Christian narrative is to say that there is a big distinction between animals and humans, and that's rational.
Yeah, but why do animals
like,
line up, like, in such a perfectly healthy way with, like, the human diet?
How do that? Like, they definitely do not. What do you mean?
They absolutely do. The nutritional profiles you get from consuming meat is, like, vastly superior to... You have to do, like, a pretty complicated dance of vegan diets and supplementation and shit to get the same type of nutrition that you would from just eating meat.
Not really. Like, not really. Like, I think, like, in terms of a vegan diet, the only things that you'd have to supplement in the contemporary era, really, is B12 and vitamin D. Vitamin D you'd normally get from the sun. B12, the sources of B12 are dependent upon like how we think that we might have got them from water supplies, dirt, essentially like the way in which you get B12 is like a microorganism in the first place. It just so happens to essentially collect in the gut of a ruminant. So it's not like, and even then, like when you're looking at where we would be getting our sources of B12 prior to this, like I don't think it's fair to say that a vegan diet couldn't be just as healthy. And also we don't seem to have the
Vegan
like,
diets,
look at it, man.
vegan
Like,
diets can be as healthy, but it's substantially more complicated to try to like get the same sorts of, like, for instance, essential amino acids. You've got to mix a ton of different types of food to match that, or like you just said, B12 supplementation.
you
Like
could just eat walnuts.
you can't just eat
for-
walnuts. What do you mean you can just eat walnuts?
Sorry, and omega 3s and 6s. Sorry, not amino acids.
Yeah.
Amino acids isn't hard at all, actually. I mean, like amino acid profiles, you can eat like like I'm not one for whole protein kind of bollocks anyway, because I think it's basically a myth. But even if you did, you can eat beans and rice will give you a 1.1 amino acid profile, so it exceeds beef. So
That's
like
Absolutely
like,
not true. But
black beans and brown rice will exceed beef in terms of amino acid distribution.
why was Jesus feeding people fish if you're not supposed to eat them?
I think one, there is the ethics of 2,000 years ago, and I think Jesus now would be vegan. And two, I would say that there is there's loads of stuff. I mean, there's like depending on how you understand what was going on in the Bible. Like Jesus never said anything about slavery, yet most Christians would say slavery was wrong, wouldn't we? Because the ethics that he teaches indicates that this behavior was wrong.
Well, hold on.
Whether
Firstly,
it was right
weren't there
2,000
literally?
years
I'm pretty
ago.
sure, like in Deuteronomy and stuff, there are guidelines to owning slaves, are there not? So the Bible does mention it.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean,
believe
there
the
is-
Bible mentions anything ever at all about veganism, does it?
Well, there's the covenant. There's the God's covenant with the animals. There's our stewardship.
You gotta have
Um,
kosher food.
Yeah, and like
And
the
also,
fact that
when
all
Jesus fed
plants
people
are
with
halal.
fish, why wouldn't he
even-
just create black beans and rice? Like the fish weren't. He started with 4 fish and he ended with 1,000 or whatever, right? Why wouldn't he just
Someone
create-
handed it. One thing is that someone handed him the fish. Like, it's not like,
Sure, but why not
even
turn
if
it
Jesus
into-
went and caught the fish, even if Jesus went and caught the fish, there is two things to be said, right? One, he's God, right? The whole point, like I hate to evoke divine command theory, but if God comes down and manifests nature, right? Nature and the whole point for Christians is to be for the good of God. So the fact that like Jesus has made nature for himself and for the good of God, right? For the good of the Trinity, you could say. It means that like essentially like if it was for the good in that situation, it was for the good. Like if it was what God wanted, it is the good. Like tautologically for Christians. Like even if like for example like I can command someone to go and murder their son, it will be wrong. If God commands someone to go and murder their son, that is a story we teach our children. Like, it's not the same thing.
Okay, I feel like I don't know how. Yeah, I guess. I mean, if you're religious, you're already doing like tremendous leaps of faith, I guess, to make that worldview work. But the fact that then
I don't
you would
think
take, well, I mean, you are. But then the fact that you would take like the fact that the Bible has zero mention whatsoever of any sort of vegetarian, vegan, anything, and you're trying to read through this that you can still be a vegan or vegetarian while being Catholic, is a fun.
What are you talking about? The Catholic Catechism says that we should not cause needless suffering to animals, and that we should needless suffering or death to animals, and that the use of animals is basically tied to the human good. And the human good, like let's look at even scripture on this. Noah's being given animals to eat in the first place was the human need because the world had been flooded. There wasn't anything else to eat. And even how you interpret that, it might be even more limited. That only certain things like eggs and stuff were actually meant to be consumed at that point. But it depends upon translation. So like the way in which scripture works in towards animals, like animals have been made with a manifest end goal, which we could see through a consideration of natural law. They have a telos, and God said that is good, and he gave us the role to consider that good in our day-to-day lives. So like, don't pollute rivers, don't fucking destroy the rainforest and the ocean and that. It's the only reason that we're in this situation is because essentially like the Protestant reformers, many like interpret it very harshly in the first place with the cultural mandate, but it sort of got polluted over time. It got like diluted over time, where like it's just do what the fuck you
why
want
would
in
the
nature
Pope
for
not
human
just
good.
come out and make a statement on this, and then clear it all up?
Well, I
then?
mean, like, I don't think I'm not saying that I'm the standard doctrine in terms of Catholicism. I'd say I'm heterodoxical. I'm not the norm. I don't think the average Catholic is going to affirm
Hold on, wait, I might be a
veganism, but I
total
think-
idiot. Can you be a heterodox Catholic?
Yeah.
What does that mean? So, like, do you not believe
It
that
just
when the
means that,
Pope
like-
is making statements on matters of biblical scholarship or matters of, like, divine command or whatever, that the Pope is not infallible, or?
Well, it's not to say that one, there's how we understand the infallibility of the Pope, but also there's basically what makes you a Catholic is your affirmation is like 4 pillars of Catholicism. There's like the creed, there's the Our Father, there's the I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head now. There's the creed, there's the Our Father, Faith Catholic. Oh shit, that's just like totally evading us. Creed, the Our Father.
Faith,
There's,
sacraments, life in Christ, and prayer.
Yeah, sacraments, and yeah, basically. And as long as you affirm all of those in the same way, that would be like for example, you affirm like the Catholic Trinity, the Apostolic Creed, you affirm, the sacraments, and you affirm these sort of basic structures, then you're a Catholic. And then there's a wide variety. There's huge amounts of debate within the Catholic Church. I mean, it's a huge religion. Remember, like, the Scholastics were like some of the largest like debate bros in the fucking world ever. Like there's like whole manuals on how to debate. So like we can have our own ideas.
So you do believe in like evolution, though, right?
Yeah, 100% believe in evolution. Yeah, I'm not a
So,
fucking idiot. Yeah.
Do you deny that like
Wait, what
our
is it? Hold
bodies
on, wait,
are
wait.
like made to eat meat
Yeah, wait, what is
throughout
this?
evolution?
Genesis 9:3. Okay, I'm just reading Bible verses now. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. Every moving thing, yeah.
That's the story of Noah, which I brought up before, which was essentially contextual to the specific point in which he was.
Why would he
well,
give him
given.
animals to eat? That's unethical. Can't God just make more vegetables?
God, like, I think like when we're talking about, you could basically say this with the problem of evil in general. Like, why doesn't God just solve all of the fucking problems in the world? Like, there are certain things which are morally acceptable in certain circumstances, which God has outlined, and then there are things which are not.
Hold
And
on,
remember,
wait,
like, I'm a
real
Catholic.
quick on
I
that.
think
Is
this
there
is
any other example where God has like put forth, just like told somebody to go commit sin?
well, yeah. I mean, he said, like, for example, we would normally outline that you shouldn't go to war. God has commanded war.
Wait, but
normally
aren't
we
those
would-
wars righteously justified? Are you talking about like the Israelites and shit, or where, like, which?
Yeah, but in the same way that the war, in the same way that the killing of animals, right, in this situation is righteously justified.
Well, how is it
That's
justified when God could
basically-
just provide you with vegetables? Like, that's different in war.
Well, why
it's
is it justified when God could have just not made those people? Like, what are you talking about? Like,
because my understanding is that sin on the planet comes from humans turning their back on God, essentially. That you ate the apple, you got the knowledge, and now humans make choices on the planet where they turn their back from God, and that's where the sin cometh from. But that's different than God just giving you something and saying, go sin. There's a difference between like one man raping a woman and God giving you a Playboy magazine. If God gives you a Playboy, and I would say, well, why would God give you a Playboy? Isn't masturbation sinful? And then for you to say, well, don't men rape women? Like, that's sinful too, right? Well, that's different. In one, you've got two humans making poor decisions, which is where evil comes from. But then in the other, the source of the evil is God itself. That doesn't make any sense to me from a Catholic point of view.
but I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in one instance it's a sin, in one instance it's not, and that's based on contexts which God has outlined, which is.
But you haven't
essentially
given me
one
the
was the point of
you haven't
need.
given me the context of why God wouldn't
Well,
just give him corn.
Well, it's like the same reason why God just doesn't intervene divinely and give the Jews Israel. Like,
Wait, no, hold on. You're playing a trick here. I don't know where you're doing this. I'm not giving you a circumstance where God has to intervene against other humans. That's just a one-on-one relationship between God and Moses. Why wouldn't God give Moses corn? I'm not talking about like why God wouldn't stop some other humans or help in a war or do human versus human conflict. This is just a one-on-one between God and Moses. Why wouldn't he just give him corn?
But what I don't understand is if we're talking about essentially what is a supernatural intervention, right? Like, God can intervene and do whatever the fuck he wants, right? That's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
He can manifest nature in any way, shape, or form that would as to conform with his will. Then the whole point is that there must be a reason he's not intervening here. Now, I'm saying that he's not intervening for the same reason, which is human free will. Essentially.
Hold on, no, wait. You're
we're not-
obfuscating so much. No, this isn't about human free will or intervention. God could have given Moses corn, right? Why would he just not give Moses corn? This isn't about like Moses surviving in the wilderness or whatever. This is just things that God could give Moses. Why couldn't he just give him a ton of vegetables?
Like, I think, like, I hope you understand that one. I don't think this is literal. Like, I'm not a fundamentalist. I don't think the Bible is literal. I think this is allegory.
Okay, well, hold on. If it's allegorical, that hurts your argument even more, because in an allegory, would it not make more sense for God to give him vegetables to show the goodness in eating from the lands and having a kind dominion over animals? God provided Moses with two of every animal so that mankind got a peaceful dominion over animal, and then gave him vegetable to eat from?
Not at all, because if you look at the structure of the story, Eden is essentially a bloodlust domain in which animals only ate from humans only ate from trees. And then after that, sin enters the world. God has to divinely intervene in order to crush out sin. And humans are left on a boat with only animals to eat, and can eat animals only in that circumstance. So what it shows is essentially humans have a responsibility to themselves that doesn't apply to animals, but humans also have a responsibility to animals in general. So it's not like you can eat animals in general, I don't care. It's that in this select circumstance, you can eat animals, which shows that human morals are constrained to specific circumstances which are being outlined in the scripture.
Okay, I feel like we're... Okay, this seems really goofy, but alright.
That's fine. Like, I'm happy to...
I mean,
look at it like this.
It reminds me of like when people make the argument that like the United States is expressly and specifically like a Christian nation, and despite the fact that like our founding fathers, who are all like the main the main character, and wrote a ton and so much, and we've got the Declaration, we got articles, we've got the Constitution, we've got so many things. For some reason, all of them were too stupid to ever write at any specific point. The U.S. is a Christian nation. They never wrote it. I don't know why they wouldn't write that. And I feel similar with the Bible. We've got the whole Bible. We've got all these councils in Nicaea, all these different books and everything. At no point, why doesn't somebody just write, and thou shalt not eat meat? Like, why can't that be Commandment 11 or whatever? Like, it just seems like it would be such an obviously important thing.
The same reason why it took a while forward to affirm that slavery was wrong. Look, like the way that the way in which the Christian faith develops is that it develops. Like, the living tradition moves alongside it. And as we become more rational and we understand what is right and wrong more clearly, we develop in light with that, with the light of reason. Like, it's like, would you rather we be a dumb bunch of monkeys who rely upon only what people said previously?
I mean, the books of the Bible are the books of the Bible. There might be some... I mean, we might reinterpret to make it fit our modern day life, but not eating animals is a pretty big thing. If that was supposed to be like in the original patch
So's not having slaves. So's not having slaves, yet it wasn't like written, don't have slaves.
I feel like slavery was something that was explicitly allowed in the Old Testament. Were there guidelines for treating slaves? Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, but one of the biggest points is to say that like slavery would be wrong according to most Christians now against Christianity. Like, in terms of how we understand Christianity, we'd say that Christian ethics forbids having slaves.
Okay.
And you know, in relation to the America being Christian, kind of. I mean, there was like America, like the whole point is that the founding fathers were liberals, right? Let's be frank. Well, mostly liberals, but they were liberal Christians. They believed that you had to come to Christ through your own reason, and so relied upon the reasoning of everyone. So they couldn't command someone be a Christian for one. The liberal doctrine that they affirmed does rely upon a creator God. You know, we what is it that we take these rights to be self-evident, you know, as given by a creator God. So it's not like as if like your country wasn't essentially the product of a Christian form of development. It was just that that they were rational enough to see that a Christian nationalism is an oxymoron. That it's like you're forcing someone to try and accept God into their hearts, Christ in their hearts, which is actually un-Christian. So I would say that, like, you know, your nation was and is a Christian nation in custom, in constitution, but not in terms of command. I think that would be fucking moronic.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
So
but, I mean, yeah.
I mean, I wanted to kind of take this back because I Destiny, I assume you don't actually think that you are begging the question in that you do still have a reason for why you would value human consciousness, right?
Yeah, I think human conscious of a kind, but I mean, like, it's at some point, if we go fundamental enough, it's going to be question begging, probably, right? But I mean, I would argue that all things are at some fundamental level.
So,
Well, sorry.
wouldn't that mean that you are just valuing humans then, though? Like, if that's the case, like you just that we do just happen to value humans.
Sure,
because
but if
they're
we get down to
humans?
some really fundamental level, like, why do you value humans? Why do you value why do you value happiness over suffering? Why do you value long life over short life? Why do you value fulfillment over, like, I mean, at some point it's going to get incredibly arbitrary. Like, I'm not going to have a good reason for any of this. It's just going to be almost like axiomatic. And I'm just going to appeal to, like, I guess the common feelings of, like, every other human, basically.
Like, to say it's axiomatic implies a rationality that's not present, right? Like, you're saying that's self-evident, right? Or that it's rational to be presumed. But really, you're saying it's arbitrary, right? You're just saying that it comes from your passions. Like, that's all you're saying. Like, it's emotional.
Sure.
You just feel a certain way. But I just don't
Well,
see
yeah,
why you
or it
even
comes
go into
from
these
the brain,
debates,
yeah.
man. Why are you even going into these debates telling the people how you feel? Like, I feel this way about abortion. Why? Because I like to think of consciousness in this way. Why do you think of it this way? Because I feel this emotion about it. That's all it is. It's prescriptivism. I feel this way. I wish you would too.
Sure, but at the end of the day, I think that, like, the goal is to probably find, like, what is the most consistent set of guidelines by which to live our life, and I don't agree that people that take a pro-life position would adhere to a consistent set of guidelines. I think the set of guidelines that I lay out would be more consistent if they were followed through and through, whereas on his, I think that there were, like, the bullets that I had to bite from my worldview were if babies could be born without brains, but you could later give them a drug that would give them brains, could you rape the baby until it got the drug that grew its brain? That was like the type of hypothetical that I had to bite the bullet on, which I'm fine with. The hypothetical that he had to bite bullets on, where every single miscarriage has to be investigated as a potential homicide, 64 cell clumps need to be kept alive indefinitely in petri dishes. Plan B, would have to be, anytime you take a plan B, that has to, there has to be an accompanying murder investigation. It has to be, it was illegal for all forms of suicide. People in persistent vegetated states need to be kept alive for decades. If somebody has permanent brain damage that keeps them from ever waking up at 20 years old, they've got to be kept alive for 50, 60 years. Yeah, I think that I feel like the system of prescriptions that I'm making, we're going to be a lot more consistent than the system of prescriptions that he would have.
I think you've totally misrepresented Trent. I think you've totally misrepresented Trent there. Because I think Trent was fair enough to say that he would value, like, all forms of human life, but in terms of investigating every instance of a miscarriage, it's fine for, he even indicated that it depends upon things like resource distribution, reasonable
these are cop-outs.
Reasonable suspicion.
Yeah. These are all cop-outs. These are all cop-outs. These are all cop-outs.
How is that a cop-out?
Because everything you're saying applies to every single homicide investigation, obviously.
Yes, it does.
But giving these types of qualifiers is because he's trying to cop out from the obvious optics of it looking really bad, that if a woman has a miscarriage on 3 weeks, which is obviously like a dramatic and unfortunate thing, that there probably needs to be some light investigation accompanying that to make sure that she wasn't conducting herself in a way that was causing the miscarriage. But
I don't think you'd have I think you'd be fine to say if she rocked up drunk or, like, on cocaine or something, right? Mm-hmm. And you had visible reasons to believe, like, you had a reasonable suspicion, then an investigation would take place. But what he was saying is that essentially, that in this situation, that it's not reasonable to investigate every single miscarriage, because we don't have reason to believe that these women are not just miscarrying, because it is a dangerous time for developing humans, right?
Sure, and there are sometimes there's a thing called SID, sudden infant death syndrome, right? Sometimes for reasons that I don't think we've figured out yet, sometimes babies just die. It's incredibly tragic and it happens, but I'm pretty sure you would say that all of those are probably worth some light investigation as well, correct? Or do you think somebody could just bring a dead baby to a hospital and say, ooh, SIDS, sorry, LOL?
I think they probably are either way, though, because you would want some sort of, like, medical reasoning for why you had the miscarriage. And so just getting the medical reasoning in and of itself is going to decide whether or not there should be a legal investigation as well.
I mean, it depends. Some people miscarry early on. They're not going to the hospital to get, like, super medical reasons. Unfortunately, I think the majority of miscarriages are due to weird genetic abnormalities that just happen early on during gestation.
Let's be frank as well, miscarriage is way more common than SIDS.
Yes, it is.
Miscarriage is, Yeah.
Which is also a huge
So, like,
problem because it's
reasonable
basically
suspicion.
like billions of babies are dying, like, or maybe not billions,
Yeah,
but like
I mean,
tens of millions of babies
like
are
in
dying.
some respects, you could say it's a huge problem. Like a criminal's can more easily cover their tracks. Fair enough, but it also means that it would be more of an impeachment upon an individual's rights to perform unnecessary, like essentially to infringe upon their bodily autonomy for the tests and so on. So, like we would say that the reasonable suspicion cannot be granted in this scenario. And also, like, let's be frank, right? I think that the
Wait, hold on. Wait,
point
you're
of-
just saying so many random things. Reasonable suspicion. Every time you say something like this, I feel like intuitively, what you're striking at is you actually don't see the 64 cells as a baby. Because none of these other statements would apply if we were talking about probably if you're like an 8-month fetus or an actual born child. They're like, ooh, it's really inconvenient to investigate, or ooh, are we going to assume that they did something bad to the baby? If it was a born child, the answer would be yes, 11 out of 10 times. But because it's a fetus, you're like, oh, you know, really? Like, I feel like you're intuitively hitting at the same point that a pro-choicer does.
Not at all. Like, not at all. What I'm saying, one, I believe in soul and star to the point of sentience, right? I'm a sentientist. We've been through this. But two, in relation to Trent's position, which I'm sort of standing here, it's the fact that there is the reasonable suspicion in relation to what is a highly risky, highly probabilistic explanation is, like, it has to be considered. Like, we'll have to consider that, okay, is someone reasonably likely to have deliberately terminated this pregnancy or in fact going through a highly traumatic event right now? And does this justify us impeaching or imposing or trespassing on their rights to perform an intensive investigation, which is likely going to prove, or at least, 99 times out of 100, going to prove that it is actually just a miscarriage. And that's even if we could prove it in the first place.
So you just
I think
wouldn't
that-
investigate? You don't think it's worth investigating to see people are murdering babies? Because some people
think
might be
that-
uncomfortable with the investigation?
I don't think that's I think that what I've said is that I would be wanting reasonable suspicion, like reasonable reasonable suspicion, where it's like, okay, why do we believe this isn't an ordinary miscarriage?
So a woman goes into a hospital and she's like a little bit intoxicated and she's having severe stomach cramps, and then she finds out that she wasn't pregnant and she miscarried. Are we getting like a manslaughter charge here, or?
If she finds out she wasn't pregnant and she miscarried, I don't think that.
Find out she was pregnant and she miscarried.
Yeah, if she was unaware that she was pregnant, I don't think that anyone is going to be wanting to charge them.
Why?
Because, like, for the same reason that if you knock someone over in a car on a road because you didn't see them round the corner and you had no way to see them round the corner or no reason to predict that they were going to be there, and you're following all the rules of the road, you're not getting a manslaughter charge.
I'm
Because you've
almost
not done
positive
something
you
that is-
almost are always getting a manslaughter charge, because they'll say you were driving too fast for conditions or you didn't have your headlights on or something else.
No,
right?
I'm saying let's just assume you are. Let's just assume you are driving at a reasonable speed. You had your headlights on.
Yep.
But you couldn't see them, right? There was no way you saw them. Like they walked in front of the car. Like whatever. It happens, right? Accidents happen. That's the same thing.
I think it would depend on the exact circumstances. Like, I can imagine in some cases where you're correct, but for the woman, like, the woman is being negligent because she's had sex, so it's possible that she could be pregnant, right? Like, there's a reasonable chance that you could be pregnant if you're having sex.
Yes, I mean, if you were to say, like, was the woman on birth control and stuff like
Yeah,
that
even
as
if you're on
well,
birth control, we're talking about. Remember, this is your position. We're talking about.
It's not my position.
No,
This
no.
is Trent's position.
This
but I'm
is Trent's
standing it,
position.
yeah.
We're talking about murdering babies or killing babies, right? And in all
Yeah.
those involuntary manslaughter charges that you're bringing up, you better believe there's a full investigation every time. You wouldn't be able to just tell the police, "Oh my God, the guy just popped out. I didn't see him," and they wouldn't go, "Oh, okay, that's chill. We're not going to investigate. That's fine." Like, there's going to be a full investigation every single time.
I think if we're talking, but the whole point is that if we're talking, like the rates and like, what do you think our infant mortality rate would have to be to match the rate of miscarriages in like, just generally? Like it would. The
I've seen
whole
anywhere
point
from
is that
15 to 50% of pregnancies miscarry, depending on the numbers.
Yeah,
used.
like-
Sure.
like there's a huge difference. Like we not only do pragmatically can we afford to put these resources in, but we have a much greater reason to believe that there was essentially foul play, and that's even with SIDS.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I'm just saying that if you truly believe these are real babies dying, then we need to treat it with the gravity of a real baby dying.
Every crime is serious, but reasonable suspicion is applied in every single case. And I don't think that you're not giving the same gravity.
Yeah, but I'm just
Yeah, I
saying
don't
that,
think
like,
all deaths aren't investigated.
yeah, I know,
in
but
the
I'm just
same
saying that,
way,
like,
right?
of all the grand total of all the things happening in the universe right now, a pro-lifer's number one thing shouldn't even be to stop abortions. It should probably be to find ways to combat miscarriages. That should be, like, the most important thing, because that is the greatest loss of life that's happening on the planet right now. It's not genocide, it's not abortion, it's miscarriages. And then I've seen up to 40% of miscarriages could be prevented as well. That people involved in, like, heavy lifting, some sort of alcoholic consumption, because just things that women do, I think even staying up late was a predictor, things that women do because they just don't know they're pregnant. And the very early stages of pregnancy can be predictive of miscarriages. But that should be, like, the number one
you can't
health
even
issue.
You can't even detect pregnancy.
There's a really
many of the
easy way
stages.
to detect pregnancy, and that's if a dick has been inside of you and is ejaculating. If you know that's happening, then there are probably some
Not with
precautions.
birth control, like that's the
Sure,
thing. Like,
even with birth control,
it
though.
eliminates 99.9%.
99 point, what if I told you that you were engaged in an accident, there's a 0.1% chance of murdering a child? Do you think you'd just be like blasé about it?
No, but like
You're
we'll
laughing
see,
because
like,
it's funny,
what
but
do
I
you think
agree,
the
it is
race?
funny. But it is funny because you don't really consider that fetus to be a baby the same way. Because if this is a baby, then you would be treating it as the gravity situation. But it's funny because, like, it's a fucking 2-cell petri dish fetus. Of course it's funny, which I agree, it is funny, but...
I think that it's not even just that. Like, look at it like this. Like, if I was to go and drive a car on the road, there is a certain percentage that I'm going to be in a serious accident, or even just an accident, and I should take all of those accidents seriously. But that wouldn't stop me driving a car, because we'd say that there's reasonable risk. Now, I'm not one of those people that's going to say that sex should only be for reproduction. I don't think that's the case. Maybe that, you know, Trent or some other Catholic is going to actually affirm that sex only has the purpose of reproduction. I think that it has more than the purpose of reproduction. I think pleasure, and I think, well, specifically love, is essentially the overall, the unity of two people in terms of their desires. I think that's a lovely thing. I don't know why we'd want to get rid of that, right? Now, let's take that you've got someone on contraceptive, they're engaging in this action. There's very, very small chance to believe that they're actually going to be impregnated. They don't realize that they're pregnant until after the miscarriage. I think that that we could say that this person did not have any of the prerequisites necessary for committing a crime. Something like the guilty mind, like mens rea. Were they intentionally or committing this action that was like essentially
hold on. Mens rea doesn't mean that you intended to harm somebody. The mens rea could just be that you were being reckless, right? Like the mens rea for involuntary manslaughter is not I was trying to kill somebody and it happened lightly, right? It could just be you're engaged in a negligent behavior.
Yes. So are you saying that all like under Trent's view, you're saying that all sex with protection would still be reckless if you want
taking high
testing or
precautions,
taking precautions?
Yeah.
Right.
Because you're in like you're in like murder baby mode essentially. Yeah. You might kill a child.
Right.
That's a really big deal, I think. Do you think? I feel like that. I feel like killing children is a really big deal. Yeah.
I mean, I would agree. Killing children is a really big deal. I just don't know whether they would affirm that this is because it is the percentage, right? It depends on what depends on what protection you're using. Like if you're using the pull-out method, then yeah, I think most people are going to say lock them the fuck up. You know, your pull-out game was too weak, you're going to jail. But I think the alternative is also that they were using like a highly effective form of contraception, let's say even multiple forms of contraception, and yet there is this freak accident. But the problem is that that's also in terms of miscarriages. There's no way to know whether this was an absolute freak accident in relation to two people taking every precaution necessary to engage in what is a loving act and a good act to engage in for a couple to enjoy versus they're being blasé and not giving a fuck about, you know, infants. And there's just no way, and that's not including the fact that there is also the people who do know they're pregnant and yet maybe take the risks. And then there's the people who do know they're pregnant and also, you know, just have a tragic accident. Like that's the problem with this whole scenario, is that there's just so fucking many that it's just like this, the pragmatics of it don't work out. And even the reasonable suspicion is going to be, you're going to have some sort of tangible like you've done something fucking dodgy for me to be willing to investigate. It's like, look, when an old person dies, we don't make sure that they weren't smothered every fucking time, right? Or like someone like didn't slip them a pill, because
I understand everything you're saying. It's just none of this matters. But I know there's a lot of talking about, but like we're talking about killing children, and you're trying to give me this whole thing of like, well, it wouldn't be pragmatic to research it. It wouldn't be like, I don't know if we've got the research. Like, you're giving me all these things. Not a single one of these things would apply. The whole country was looking for Elizabeth Smart. We've got Amber Alerts on our phone to try to alert every single person in an area if a child has been abducted. People go above and beyond when it comes to helping and saving children. But that intuition is completely absent when it comes to the largest genocide of children in the world, which are miscarriages. It's not even there for an inkling of it. You don't even have the slightest feeling of like, maybe we should actually change, dramatically restructure the way society works to alleviate this problem. You don't even have you're just like, fuck it. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell if you kill a baby or not. Like,
I'm
do
not
you really
saying, like,
your entire argument summed up is like, it's kind of hard to tell if you kill a baby, and it's like, god damn, that's somebody who's like, fuck it. That's your entire argument, and you can say it in more words than that, which you're
why
gonna
don't we do this for old people? Like, why, like loads, like old people are dying all over the fucking place, right? And it's a natural thing, like in the same way as a miscarriage is a natural thing.
We do,
right?
We do an extraordinary amount. Look at how many homeless people can go into an emergency room over and over and over again and rack up bills that are 6-7 figures large sometimes. We do an extraordinary amount of care. It might not seem like it, but yeah, we have an extraordinary amount of care available for people in the United States that are funded by the federal government. But for
we'll have an extraordinary amount of I mean, like whether the United States does enough, I think is very questionable. Let's take the case of like old people dying, old people's homes, hospitals, hospices, wherever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like all of those, like you. I mean, let's be frank. Every 1 in 5 old people could be getting like murked at and we would have very little way to know whether that was the case, but we don't have any reasonable suspicion, right? Like in the same way, like have the hospital staff been attentive enough? Have they been given their medications on time? Have they been
of my father's sons! Your end is come!
Fed an adequate diet? Have they been laid down flat?
I don't understand.
Have
I
they
don't,
been given
I don't
wrong
understand what you're
medications?
saying. This happens all the time, where there are old people's homes where they might mistreat patients. I'm pretty sure my grandma got a settlement because her tailbone got broken at the hospice or the whole person's homes that she was at when they were mistreating her. Yeah, these types of investigations, people care about this and investigate this type of stuff all the time.
But they only investigate when there's a reasonable suspicion. We don't investigate every death of every person at an old people's home, at a hospital or anything like that, do we?
No,
like,
but that's
even though we would
usually-
all consider it incredibly serious by your own standard.
Yeah, but that's
we
because the
consider
cause
it
of
incredibly
death.
serious.
Once people are at that stage in life, the cause of death is usually like they're at
And
this
at the same stage, inverted, a miscarriage is the most likely cause of death. And so
Okay.
it's the same reasoning.
Then let's say that is the same reasoning. Then why do you care about an abortion at like 6 weeks, 8 weeks? It was almost likely to die anyway. Is an abortion actually bad at this point then?
Well, there's a very big difference between it happening because of a natural cause and me causing it to happen. Like Hurricane Katrina annihilating New Orleans, tragic. Wish it didn't happen. Maybe we could have done something about it. Not I'm gonna drop a nuke and just fucking flood New Orleans. Like there's a big fucking difference there.
I don't know if there is. If you're telling me that like you'd assume that it's gonna die anyway, because that seems like what you're saying for like a fetus. The assumption is you're probably gonna miscarry, probably
You
gonna
just want
die.
to nuke Florida. You're just wanting to nuke Florida. I can see it. I can feel it in your voice. Like it's like, come on, man. Of course there's a big difference there. It's
If
not that
there's
it's going
such
to
an
die
assumption-
anyway.
If there's such an assumption of a fetus that there's a decent chance of it miscarrying anyway, who cares if someone has an abortion?
There's a decent chance that there's going to be a Category 4 or 5 hurricane hit Florida at some point. It doesn't mean that we should be trying to hurry the process along.
Correct, but on the contrary, what happens when those hurricanes happen? People take every single precaution. We don't just say, nobody would say, Cat 4 hurricane? Some people are probably going to die, good luck. No, FEMA comes in, people evacuate cities, people get food in advance, people do everything they can to preserve life.
100%. You go to an emergency room. You
But
say,
in
I think I'm having a miscarriage.
world, but in
I
your
need
world, a Cat 4,
progesterone.
no, in your world, a Cat 4 hurricane comes by and you're like, half are probably going to die anyway, good luck. Keep working.
I think I don't think that this makes sense, right? Because I think that, look, we're saying that these are highly risky scenarios, right? And we'll not investigate every single scenario. That doesn't translate to fuck it, kill them anyway. I don't see how that I don't see how that follows.
Because it sounds to me like you're basically, if you're at a point where you expect most of them to die, and if it does die, most of the time we're not even going to investigate because they're probably going to die anyway, then you've essentially fabricated the right of like, I mean, if people want to kill it that early, like, who cares? Most of them are going to die anyway. We're not going to bother investigating most of it. Like, why not? It feels like that's essentially the world that you've constructed.
Well, that's the same thing as old people. Like, if oh fuck it, if we're not gonna kill them at that point anyway, like who's gonna like no? We're like if we have reasonable suspicion, we're gonna investigate because it's wrong. It's just that unfortunately nature's a bit of a bitch at times.
We don't
And-
treat old people that way though. I don't know why you keep saying that. We do everything we can to preserve the life of those older people. Cause of death is generally known. If an old person goes into an old person's house and they die in 3 days, nobody's just saying like, oh, you know, old person, they died. There'd probably be an investigation there.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, like, if you mean like if there was like there would only be an investigation if there wasn't reason to believe they died of a natural cause in a natural way. Like that's why we would say the circumstances are not suspicious, and then there's no investigation, right? Like,
Yeah, but there's probably some sort of like post-mortem done or something generally.
I don't think so. Like, I think there's a cause of death that's attributed, but like I don't think that given like full autopsies
Not
to
like
every
a
old
full
person.
autopsy, but you'll know. Like if somebody has Alzheimer's disease and develops like pneumonia and starts dying from complications of that, you're not going to cut into them, but like the whole like thing is kind of laid out.
Yeah, so if someone has a like so if there's a miscarriage and it's a really high likelihood in the same way that there were like a 70 or 8 well like an 89-year-old gets pneumonia or she's been coughing for 3 days and then falls down dead. It's like yeah, she could have like it's very possible someone came in with a fucking pillow and
Yeah, but if
smothered
somebody
her.
falls down
like-
dead in a house, you would investigate that. Same way if somebody comes in with a miscarriage, you should probably also investigate that as well, I think. I'm just saying if we're truly killing babies here, it feels like it's worth looking into, but
I think it's I would just apply the same reasoning to the elderly, like man. I think
But
that
we
I think there
do.
could be
We do
I
for
think there's
every-
a genocide going on right now. Like they're killing
understand.
all of the geriatrics.
Yeah, maybe you just don't have any experience with this, but people absolutely care about this, and people absolutely do look into this. There's a reason why, especially for like Hispanic communities, it's probably true for white people too, but like putting your mom in like a home is like one of the most disgusting, disrespectful, and rude things that you can do as a child. At least in Cuban communities, bro, my family, holy shit, when it came to, that's why my mom left me when I was 16 to move to fucking Florida to take care of her mom. The idea of putting older family in homes, this is a thing that everybody talks about. I don't know if you think that like most people just
To be
send
fair,
their
I think you're right. Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know what you come to this thing like, oh, like, well, when we start taking older people dying seriously, like, people do take older people dying seriously. It's a really serious thing. It's not blasé at all.
I agree, but
Like,
then, but from this standard, like, do you think that, like, from your standard, which is essentially, like, if we were to consider this a human, like, in terms of the miscarriage, we should be doing a full investigation simply because this is a negative scenario? Why wouldn't we do that with old people? Like, every time an old person dies,
you
full
have,
autopsy.
because you have
the
no,
fucking
no,
CI,
you're not, you can obfuscate as much
breaks
as you
the
want.
door
I
down.
know it's funny to obfuscate, but you're only obfuscating. We don't do it with old people because they're already in a medical environment where they've got a medical history, and the cause of death is more often than not known. If you want to make this an accurate comparison, stop comparing it to old people in homes. Compare it to an old person dying at their house and then police being called or 911 coming and finding a body, because that's what a miscarriage is. Miscarriages don't often happen where you're in a hospital in a monitored environment, doctors keep it happening, and then you have a miscarriage, right? If you want to talk about like a miscarriage in a hospital, that's a more equivalent comparison here. But right now we're talking about a dead baby is brought from a house to a hospital, and every time there's going to be an investigation. That's what a miscarriage is to you. If you're in the pro-life or to Trent, a dead baby is brought from a house to a hospital.
Okay,
Just
like,
real
so-
quick, I looked this up. From what I can tell, 25 million babies die from miscarriages each year. 73 million are aborted each year. So there seems to be a pretty big discrepancy between.
Hold up.
Almost
Wait.
3 times
73
the
million
I would
babies
be
are aborted every
I'd
year?
Be very surprised. I'd be very surprised if that's the case.
That's like
to be
every
frank.
every woman of birthing age getting pregnant and aborting every single year in the United States.
Yeah, so this is roughly 121 million unintended pregnancies occurred each year between 2015 and 2019. Of these unintended pregnancies, 61 ended in abortion. This translates to 73 million abortions per year.
Wait, half of women in the is this worldwide or is this in the United
Yes,
States?
this is worldwide.
Oh,
This is
okay.
worldwide.
All right. Okay. Okay.
This is worldwide. I'm having trouble finding just the U.S. numbers.
Yeah. Right. That does make a lot more sense. To be fair, that does. Okay, but then I mean the miscarriages should be way higher than that.
But
I mean,
the
especially
reality is
in
most people probably don't even know when they miscarry, or a lot.
yeah, or even wouldn't even have the means
Yeah,
to
maybe.
do anything about it when they did. Like the most of the world is like, was it like a third of the world lives under the dollar, like a day, like no access to real medical treatment. So like the miscarry, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can't
mean,
find just the U.S. numbers right now, but that is like, yeah, worldwide there seems to be a huge difference between miscarriages and abortions, and
Like,
it
I think it'd be
seems
fair
like,
to
from what I
say-
understand, the like first world countries are the ones having the most abortions. I doubt they're having the most miscarriages. So the
thing is,
stat that
every
or
abortion
what
is
was
going to
brought
be
up.
every abortion is going to be recorded, but probably half of miscarriages will be reported, because for some women, like, you can just have a really shitty period after like getting pregnant and you're not even aware that you're miscarrying. Like, that can happen. As a
Sure,
possibility.
I'm not even contesting that. It's more so that it's obvious that there's way more miscarriages than there are abortions, when it seems like worldwide there's 3 times the amount of abortions than there are miscarriages that we have on record. So even if we double, triple that, there's still going to be about the same amount.
Right. I mean, like, I think to be fair, like the number of abortions, like, that's like, you know, I think that, like, from Trent's case, I think that is like obviously a major issue, and I think that that's a distinction in kind from the miscarriage anyway, where the abortion is intentional, the miscarriage is accidental. So I mean, like, it is fair to even say, like, obviously there's one thing, like, not investigating what might be, like, even if you were to say that this is police negligence to, like, or like, you know, it's something that we would want to do but it's not pragmatic. There's a difference in obviously in saying that means that we can just do it. But I mean, like, to be fair, like, I guess the reason I'm even invested in this is, like, I think that in your case, like with the child sex doll thing, right, like do you not, like, so you so that indicates to me that it is about consciousness to you. Like, there is something about human consciousness that you give a fuck about. That if you are basically, you get like a child looking 19, like, it's got the brain of a 19-week, like, basically, let's say, like, the sort of, it has behaviors but not any real, like, unified cortex. You're willing to say, like, it can be used as like a sex doll, right? Like, if it was just like, I don't know, had the body of a 3-year-old but the mind of a 19-week-old or something, you were fine with that, right?
Body of a 3-year-old but the mind of a 90-week-old. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, like, well, 19-week or whatever, like
19
before,
weeks, yeah.
like, yeah, like, so it just why, like, surely even extrinsically, man, you would be like, that's just going to propagate a lot of horrible